The stagecoach lurched to a halt, snow cascading from its roof in white avalanche. Clara Whitlow didn't wait for the driver's assistance. She shoved the door open herself, stumbling into Montana winter like wounded animals seeking shelter. Her boots sank into Ash Hollow snow. February 1884. Cold knifed through her torn traveling dress, but Clara scarcely noticed. Pain became relative once you'd already been shattered. The dress, serviceable wool she'd worn for travel, was crusted with dried blood and frozen mud. Her shawl hung in tatters around her shoulders. Her upper lip was swollen, split down the center, the left eye nearly sealed shut, purple-green like old bruising. Her carpet bag tumbled at her feet, bursting open. Undergarments scattered across the street's dirty snow. Clara didn't bend to retrieve them. What did modesty matter now? The driver descended slowly, removing his hat. Hayes was old, his face carved by decades witnessing human misery. He studied Clara with something resembling pity. "You certain about getting off here, miss?" His voice carried careful softness. "I can take you further. No charge. California, maybe. I've nowhere else to go." The words dragged painfully past split lips. Each movement of her jaw brought agony. "I must get off here." Men began gathering. There were always men in such places, lounging in saloon doorways, leaning against posts, hungry eyes tracking any hint of skirt. Clara felt them before she saw them, predators recognizing prey. The Red Peak Tavern dominated the main street, sturdy timber construction with covered porch. Smoke curled from its chimney. Inside, Clara heard rough laughter, the clink of glasses, some out-of-tune piano struggling through a melody. A man emerged from the saloon, 30-some years, hair slicked with pomade, clothing too fine for honest labor. His smile was calculated, well practiced. Clara knew that species of smile. Silas Thornton had smiled exactly that way before the first blow landed. Oh, well. The man descended the porch steps with studied deliberation. Looks like someone had herself a difficult journey. Other men approached, forming a semicircle. Clara recognized hunger in their eyes, not hunger for food. The man removed his hat in mockery of courtesy. Name's Roy Garrison. He removed his hat in mockery of courtesy. "I own this establishment." Clara noticed the ring on his left hand, gold with black stone. Mourning ring. "My late wife also came from far away, girl." Roy advanced another step. "The West devours fragile women, but I can offer shelter and work." The way he pronounced work made Clara's stomach turn. No, thank you." She tried for firmness, but her voice emerged tremulous, weak. "Don't be proud." Roy stood too close now. Clara could smell cheap whiskey and tobacco. "A woman in your condition can't afford refusing help." Clara retreated until her back struck the stagecoach's rough side. "The lady comes with me." A new voice cut through the cold air like a drawn blade. The men turned, Clara too. He stood in shadow between two buildings, tall, broad-shouldered, beneath worn leather coat. Wide-brimmed hat concealed half his face, but Clara saw gray eyes, cold as Montana's winter sky. "Coleman?" Roy turned slowly, smile narrowing. "Been a while since you came down from those hills of yours." "The lady comes with me," the stranger repeated. Not question, not request. "Interesting timing, you showing up just now." Roy tilted his head, studying the other man. "You always did have a talent for timing." The stranger ignored the provocation. His eyes found Clara's. "You have a choice." His voice was rough, little used. "Come with me or stay here. Decide." Clara looked between them. Roy Garrison, with his predator's smile and poisonous promises. The stranger, all dangerous silence and cautious distance. Neither was safe. She knew this with certainty born from hard learning that men lied. But there was difference between them. Roy looked at her like property to be acquired. The stranger looked at her like person who needed to make a choice. Clara retrieved her carpet bag. The undergarments remained in the snow, abandoned like everything else she'd left behind. "I'll go with you," she said. The stranger nodded once and extended his hand. Clara hesitated, then accepted. His hand was rough, calloused from years of hard work, but the touch was gentle. Roy laughed, ugly sound that raised gooseflesh on Clara's arms. "Careful, Coleman. The West already took one woman from you." He paused, letting the words hang in frozen air. "Don't let it take another." The stranger, Coleman, didn't respond, just guided Clara away from the saloon, away from hungry eyes, away from that cruel laughter's sound. Elias Coleman's hand remained steady beneath hers. The wagon climbed into the Montana hills as afternoon light bled through skeletal pines. Clara sat rigid beside Elias, her ruined dress gathering dust from the trail. The world narrowed to rhythms, hoof beats against frozen earth, wind cutting through wool, the creak of leather and wood. Elias drove in silence. His hands on the reins were steady, calloused, moving with economy that spoke of years learning wasted motion, cost energy he couldn't afford. Clara watched those hands. They didn't shake. Whatever demons haunted Elias Coleman, they didn't live in his fingers. The trail narrowed, pines pressed close, branches heavy with snow that threatened but hadn't fallen. "How far?" Clara's voice startled them both. "Another hour. Ranch is past the ridge line." Clara understood. Distance from Silas Thornton, from Chicago's whispers, from her own foolishness. "What kind of work?" "Cooking, mending, keeping house. Can't pay much, but you'll have roof, meals, and safety." Safety, as if such things existed. "And what do you get?" Elias was quiet. "Company, maybe. Place has been dead a long while." The way he said dead made Clara's chest tighten. "Why did you help me?" "Because I know what Roy Garrison offers women who arrive alone, and I know what happens when good people stand by and do nothing." "Wenlen Stikyon." The ranch appeared as they crested the final ridge. It sprawled in a small valley, protected by hills on three sides. The main house was solid timber, single-story with covered porch. Outbuildings clustered nearby, barn, smokehouse, chicken coop, all showing neglect. Fences sagged, windows were dulled by dust. The yard was overgrown with dead grass poking through melting snow. Elias pulled the wagon to a stop and climbed down. He offered his hand. Clara took it, legs unsteady. "Anna died 3 years ago," Elias said abruptly, staring at the house. "My wife. There was a collapse up on Hales Mountain. Killed her and 23 miners." Clara felt ground shift beneath her feet. "I worked for Jonathan Hale, chief of security for his mining operation. 2 years I worked that mountain. 2 years I watched him cut corners, use too much blasting powder, ignore inspections. I saw cracks forming in support beams. I heard miners complaining about instability." Elias's jaw worked. His hands clenched and unclenched. "Anna begged me to speak up, to report him to territorial authorities, or at least quit. Get out before something terrible happened." He paused. "I told her we needed the money. Hale paid 3 times what ranching brought in. I told her it wasn't my responsibility." Clara watched his face, saw guilt carved into every line. "I was hunting when it happened, 2 days tracking elk. When I came back, they'd already buried most of them. Ground was still sliding. Anna had been bringing lunch to the miners." "I'm sorry." "After the funeral, I drowned, not in water, in whiskey and debt and grief that eats everything it touches. Couldn't work the ranch, couldn't pay taxes." He pushed open the door. Interior was dim, cold. Furniture stood under dust covers like shrouded ghosts. "Hale came to me 6 weeks after Anna died, offered me money, a loan, generous terms. said he understood I was struggling, that he wanted to help families affected by the tragedy. Clara felt cold understanding. I signed papers I barely read, put the ranch up as collateral, thought it was temporary. His laugh was bitter. Hale died 6 months later. Heart gave out. I thought maybe his death would wipe the debt clean. But it didn't. No. Roy Garrison married Hale's widow, Margaret, 2 months after. Inherited everything. The mine, the properties, the loans. Elias moved to the fireplace, began stacking kindling. Roy owns the paper on this ranch, can take it any time he wants, legally. Why hasn't he? Because taking it through law is too clean. Roy wants me destroyed, wants everyone to know Elias Coleman was complicit in those deaths, that I took blood money before the collapse and debt money after. He struck a match. He's right, I did both. The fire caught, orange light pushing back shadows. Clara removed her shredded veil. So bringing me here was selfish. Roy's been circling, looking for leverage. Having you here, a woman under my roof, that's ammunition. Then why? Elias looked at her directly. Because I'm done watching bad things happen to people who don't deserve them. I failed Anna, failed those miners. I won't fail again. Clara understood this wasn't rescue, it was penance. I'm not your redemption. No, you're a person who needed help, and I'm a person who needed to give it. They walked through the silent house. Clara noticed the details. A woman's shawl hanging on a hook, boots by the door sized too small for Elias, an unfinished embroidery hoop gathering dust. Anna's presence lingered. The guest room was small but adequate. A bed, a dresser, a window facing east. Elias opened the window. There's a pump in the kitchen, outhouses out back. I'll bring wood. He left her there, door closing with careful quietness. Clara sat on the bed, springs creaking. Through the window she watched darkness claim the valley, stars emerging like scattered glass. She was alone, but not abandoned. Isolated, but not trapped. Sheltered in a house that could be seized at any moment. For the first time since Silas Thornton had shown his true nature, Clara let herself believe she might survive this. Not because she was safe, she wasn't, but because Elias Coleman had given her something more valuable. He'd given her choice, an honest warning about what that choice would cost. In the main room, Elias stood before the fire, staring into flames that did nothing to warm him. He hadn't mentioned Roy's threats were escalating, that the debt was coming due, that bringing Clara here might have painted a target on her back. But looking at her broken face, her fierce determination not to break further, Elias had recognized something he thought he'd lost with Anna. The possibility of protecting something worth protecting, even if it cost him everything he had left. The fire crackled. Outside, wolves began their evening song. And in the guest room, Clara Whitlow unpacked her ruined life and tried to imagine what came next. 3 days passed in careful routine. Clara cleaned what years of solitude had neglected. Elias worked the land with grim determination. They spoke little, but the silence between them grew less hostile, more comfortable. On the 4th morning, Clara announced she'd go to town for supplies. Elias looked up from mending harness. I can go. I'm not hiding. Clara tied her bonnet with deliberate precision. I need to learn this place if I'm staying. Something shifted in his expression. You're staying then? Until I have reason not to. He gave her a list and coins from a tobacco tin. His hand lingered on hers briefly. Stay on the main street. The ride to Ash Hollow took an hour. Clara tied the horses outside Fletcher's general store and stepped down, boots sinking into half-frozen mud. The morning air was sharp, carrying wood smoke and the distant sound of a blacksmith's hammer. She moved through the store methodically, gathering flour, salt, coffee, fabric for mending. The proprietor, Fletcher, a nervous man with thinning hair, watched her with undisguised curiosity, but said nothing. Small mercies. As Clara loaded supplies into the wagon, Roy Garrison appeared, blocking her path. 3 rough men flanked him, not the polished associates from before, but working men whose loyalty was purchased with whiskey and coin. "Miss Whitlow," his smile was practiced civility wrapped around something uglier. "Working for Coleman, I hear." Clara kept her voice level. "Mr. Garrison, interesting arrangement you've got." Roy stepped closer, forcing Clara to back against the wagon. "Living in a house that doesn't belong to the man you're living with." Clara's hands tightened on the sack of flour she held. "You see, Coleman put that ranch up as collateral 3 years ago. Borrowed money from my late partner, Jonathan Hale." Roy's tone was conversational, almost friendly. "When Hale died, I inherited his contracts, including that particular debt." The flour sack felt suddenly heavy in Clara's arms. "Now I've been generous," Roy continued. "Let Coleman stay put. Work the land, pretend it's still his. But legally, that property belongs to me, has for 2 years now." One of Roy's men, thick-necked with scarred knuckles, moved to Clara's other side. She was boxed in now, wagon at her back, predators on 3 sides. "So when I see Coleman bringing a woman to my property," Roy said, voice dropping lower, "making her work my land, sleep under my roof, well, that strikes me as presumptuous." "The debt is between you and Mr. Coleman." Clara forced steadiness into her voice. "It has nothing to do with me." "Doesn't it?" Roy tilted his head, studying her like livestock at auction. Woman with no family, no prospects, no legal standing, shacking up with a man who's 1 signature away from losing everything. You picked a bad horse, Miss Whitlow. Heat crawled up Clara's neck, not shame this time, but fury. "Coleman was head of security at Hale's mine," Roy continued, loud enough now for passers-by to hear. "Saw the dangers every day, heard the complaints, did nothing. And when good people died because of his silence, he took money from the same man whose negligence killed them." A small crowd had gathered. Clara recognized the pattern: public humiliation as weapon. "After his wife died in that collapse," Roy said, "Coleman came crawling to Hale for a loan, used the ranch as guarantee, blood money twice over, wouldn't you say?" That's enough." The voice cut through cold morning air like drawn steel. Elias stood 15 feet away, having appeared with silent sureness. He held no weapon, made no threatening gesture, but every man in the street recognized danger. Roy turned slowly. "Coleman didn't expect you in town. The lady comes and goes as she pleases." Elias positioned himself beside Clara without touching her. No one stops her. No one questions her. The crowd pressed closer. Ash Hollow loved its entertainment. Roy's smile remained fixed. "Just having a conversation about property rights, making sure Miss Whitlow understands the situation she's walked into. She understands." Elias's voice was level, controlled. "Question is whether you understand that I'm not the man I was 3 years ago." "No?" Roy's civility cracked at the edges. "You're still the man who closed his eyes while good people died. Still the man who took my money after causing their deaths. Still the man living in a house that's not his anymore." "The debt is legal," Elias acknowledged. "But it's between us. Leave her out of it." "Can't do that." Roy shook his head with mock regret. "She's living on my property. That makes her my concern, and I'm concerned she doesn't know what kind of man she's thrown in with." "Then let me make it clear." Clara stepped forward, putting herself between them. "I know exactly what Mr. Coleman is, a man who gave me choice when no one else would. A man who told me the truth about his situation before I decided to stay. Whatever debt exists, whatever happened in the past, that's between you two. But I made my choice with open eyes." Roy's mask slipped briefly. Fury flickered across his features. Brave words from a woman sleeping in borrowed beds. We'll see how brave you feel when winter comes and Coleman has no roof to offer. When I exercise my legal right to claim what's mine." He stepped back, gesturing to his men to follow. "Enjoy the ranch while you can, Coleman. I'm done being generous. Come spring, I'll be moving to foreclose. Then we'll see where your charity case ends up." "Whoa, 1 hour." He walked away, boots echoing on wooden planks. Clara's hands shook. She hid them in her skirts. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for coming." Elias shook his head. "You didn't need me. You handled him fine." They loaded the last supplies in silence. As they prepared to leave, Clara caught Elias's arm. "What he said about the debt, is it true? That he can take the ranch whenever he wants?" Elias didn't look at her. "Yes." "Then why hasn't he?" "Because Roy doesn't want the property. He wants me broken, wants me to hand it over voluntarily, admit I don't deserve it. Taking it through law is too clean." Elias finally met her eyes. "That's why you should leave, before this gets worse." Clara thought about Chicago, about Silas Thornton, about running from one trap into another, always moving, never standing. "No," she said, "I'm staying." "Clara." "I ran once. I won't run again." She climbed into the wagon. "Whatever comes, we'll face it." As they rode back, afternoon shadows lengthening across the trail, Clara felt the weight of her decision settle over her shoulders. Roy Garrison wouldn't stop. The debt was real. The threat was real. But so was her choice to stay. And choice, Clara had learned, was the only thing no one could take from you unless you surrendered it willingly. She wouldn't surrender, not again. Weeks passed, snow fell and melted, fell again. The ranch began to breathe. Clara attacked neglect with determined efficiency. She scrubbed windows until light poured through glass that hadn't seen clarity in years. She mended curtains, swept corners where dust had settled into permanence, cooked meals that filled the house with smells Elias had forgotten. Bread baking, stew simmering, coffee strong enough to wake the dead. The house came alive again. Elias watched the transformation with something like wonder. He fixed fences Clara pointed out, replaced rotted porch boards, cleared the barn of accumulated debris. Work he'd ignored for 3 years suddenly seemed urgent. They developed rhythm, unspoken but understood. He rose before dawn to tend livestock. She had coffee ready when he came in, steam rising from the cup like morning fog. She washed clothes while he repaired tools. He chopped wood while she prepared supper. Conversation came slowly, carefully. One evening, while preparing dinner, Clara found documents tucked behind cookware in the kitchen cabinet. Her hand stilled on the yellowed papers. Contract of loan. Elias Coleman, borrower. Jonathan Hale, lender. Amount $2,400, an impossible sum. Collateral. All property, including structures and land, described as Coleman Ranch, Bitterroot Valley. Date, November 3, 1881, 2 months after Anna's death. Clara's throat tightened, reading the desperation in that date. At the bottom, Hale's signature in confident script. Below it, a note in different handwriting. Debt transferred to Roy Garrison upon marriage to Margaret Hale, February 1882. She brought the documents to the main room where Elias sat oiling harness leather. "I found these." Elias stared at the papers for a long moment. Then he set down the harness, wiped his hands on his trousers. "I haven't looked at those in 2 years." Clara sat across from him. "Tell me, all of it." Elias was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then words came, slow and painful, like drawing splinters from infected wounds. "I worked as head of security for Hale's mine for 2 years. Good pay, steady work. My job was simple: make sure equipment was maintained, workers followed safety protocols, inspections happened on schedule." He stood, moved to the window where darkness pressed against glass. But Hale was in a hurry, always pushing for more ore, faster extraction. He started using too much blasting powder, skipping inspections, ignoring maintenance schedules. I saw it happening. The support beams developing cracks, the ventilation system failing, heard miners complaining about rockfalls, about the mountain feeling unstable. His reflection in the window looked haunted. Anna begged me to say something, to report it to territorial authorities, or at least quit, get out before something terrible happened. His voice dropped. But I told her we needed the money. Hale paid 3 times what ranching brought in. I told her it wasn't my responsibility to police a grown man's decisions, that the miners knew the risks. Clara watched him struggle with words that had lived too long unspoken. I chose money over lives, chose comfort over courage, and when that mountain came down, 24 people died, including my wife, who was only there because she had a good heart, because she brought lunch to men I should have protected. You couldn't have known. I did know. Elias turned from the window, eyes fierce. That's what I can't escape. I knew. The cracks were visible. The complaints were constant. I just chose not to act because acting meant losing income, meant confrontation, meant standing up when it was easier to stay seated. He moved to the fireplace, staring into flames. After the funeral, I fell apart, couldn't work, couldn't function. The ranch fell into debt, property taxes, supplies, everything I'd neglected. I was drowning in whiskey and guilt. That's when Hale offered the loan. Yes, came to the ranch 6 weeks after Anna died. Said he understood I was struggling, that he felt responsible for helping families affected by the tragedy. Offered generous terms, low interest, flexible repayment. Clara heard the bitterness in his laugh. I was too drunk and desperate to see what he was really doing, buying my silence with my own property as collateral, making sure I'd never speak against him, never testify about what I'd seen, because if I did, he'd take everything I had left. But he died. 6 months later. Heart failure, they said. Natural causes. I thought, God help me. I thought maybe his death would free me somehow, that the debt would be forgiven or forgotten. Elias returned to his chair, suddenly looking exhausted. Then Roy Garrison married Margaret Hale, and I learned that debts don't die with debtors. Roy inherited everything, the mine, the properties, the loans, including mine. Why hasn't he foreclosed? Because Roy doesn't want the ranch. He wants justice for Hale's death, wants someone to blame, someone to punish, and I'm perfect, already carrying guilt, already broken, already compromised. He can take the ranch through legal foreclosure any time, or he can push for a civil case, claiming I was complicit in the negligence that killed those miners. Either way, I lose everything. Clara looked at the documents again, the impossible sum, the signatures that bound Elias to Roy Garrison through inherited debt and inherited hatred. So bringing me here put me in the middle of this. Yes. Elias met her eyes. I'm sorry, I should have told you everything before you decided to stay, should have given you the full truth. Clara thought about Chicago, about Silas Thornton's deception, about arriving in Montana with nothing but bruises and broken trust. She thought about the coffee that was always ready when Elias came in from morning work, the fences he'd repaired because she'd pointed them out, the way he'd stood beside her in town, giving her choice even when it cost him. She thought about what it meant to be seen as a person, not as property or problem. I'm staying, she said quietly. Clara, I'm staying because I also carry guilt. She folded the documents carefully. I didn't see who Silas Thornton really was. I ignored warnings because I wanted desperately to believe in the promise of something better. And when he showed his true nature, I ran. Took the coward's path. Aradit stiotsit shibai. That's not cowardice, that's survival. Maybe, but you gave me something no one else has. You gave me choice. You told me the truth, even when it made you look terrible, even when it meant I might leave. Clara held his gaze. I'm not Anna. I can't replace her, but I can stand beside you while you figure out how to live with what you couldn't prevent." Elias's expression cracked. For the first time since Clara had met him, she saw tears in his eyes. "I don't deserve that." "None of us deserve the kindness we receive. We just decide whether to accept it or refuse it." She reached across the space between them, took his calloused hand in hers. "I'm choosing to stay, to help, to build something from what's left." His hand tightened around hers, not desperate, not possessive, just grateful. "Then we'll face whatever comes together." Outside, wind moved through pines. Inside, fire crackled in the hearth. Two broken people sat in comfortable silence, holding hands across the wreckage of their pasts, building something fragile and real from honest words and shared understanding. The documents lay on the table between them, proof of debt, proof of entanglement, proof of danger. But also proof that sometimes standing beside someone was worth more than running alone. In the morning, they would return to work, to routine, to the careful dance of two people learning to trust again. But tonight, in lamplight and firelight, Clara Whitlow and Elias Coleman allowed themselves to believe that maybe, just maybe, starting over was possible. Even when the past had claws. Even when the future held no guarantees. Even when all they had was choice and courage in each other, it would have to be enough. Spring crept into the Bitterroot Valley like a reluctant promise. Snow retreated to high elevations, revealing brown grass that would soon turn green. Clara planted a kitchen garden, seeds Nora had brought, working soil until her hands blistered, then calloused, then grew strong. Weeks passed in comfortable rhythm. The Sunday market brought the whole territory to Ash Hollow. Clara walked beside Elias through the crowd, aware of eyes following them, whispers trailing like smoke. But the whispers had changed. Less accusatory, more curious. Roy Garrison stood outside the Red Peak, watching, always watching. Clara ignored him. She'd learned that predators fed on fear and she had none left to give. They were loading supplies when Nora Sullivan appeared, riding hard into town. Her face was pale, eyes wild. She dismounted quickly, nearly stumbling. "Clara," Nora's voice was urgent, barely controlled. "I need to speak with you privately." They walked to the edge of town, past the last buildings where conversation couldn't be overheard. Nora's hands twisted together, her usual composure shattered. "I'm pregnant," she said abruptly. 4 months along." Clara squeezed her hand. "That's wonderful." "No." Nora shook her head. "You don't understand. That's not what I came to tell you." She pulled a leather envelope from inside her coat, hands trembling. "My brother Thomas, he died in the mine collapse. He was assistant supervisor, kept detailed records of everything that happened underground." Clara felt cold understanding beginning. "Thomas maintained 2 sets of books," Nora continued, voice low and urgent. "The official ones Hale required, and his own, the real ones, documenting every shortcut, every skipped inspection, every time Hale used excessive blasting powder against recommendations." She opened the envelope. Inside were pages of careful handwriting, dates, measurements, warnings. "When Thomas died, I kept these, thought maybe someday they'd matter, that someone would care enough to hold Hale accountable." Nora's laugh was bitter. "Then Hale died, and I thought it was over." But it's not. No, after Hale died, Roy falsified the official records, went through Thomas's office, changed dates, altered inspection reports, made it look like everything was done properly. Like the collapse was unforeseeable tragedy, not criminal negligence. Clara stared at the documents. Why would Roy cover it up? Because he inherited everything. If the truth came out, that Hale was criminally negligent, that warnings were ignored, there would be lawsuits, claims against the estate. Roy would lose half his fortune paying damages to victims' families. Nora's voice dropped to barely a whisper. So he buried the truth, made himself look clean, and now he's free to go after Elias, to claim moral high ground because no one knows he's the one who destroyed evidence of his partner's crimes. Does Roy know you have these? He does now. Nora's hand moved to her stomach, protective gesture Clara recognized. He came to me last week, offered to buy them. When I refused, he threatened me. With what? Said he'd claim I stole mining equipment after Thomas died, that he has witnesses who'll testify they saw me taking tools, supplies. It's a lie, but he has enough influence to make it stick. Tears spilled down Nora's cheeks. If he presses charges, I'll go to prison. My baby would be born in a cell. Clara felt rage building in her chest. He's using your pregnancy as leverage. Yes, and it's working. I can't fight him, not while carrying a child. But I can't let him destroy Elias either. These documents prove Roy covered up the truth. Prove that he's the real criminal here, not Elias. She pressed the envelope into Clara's hands. I need you to keep these safe, hidden. Don't use them unless you absolutely have to, unless Roy moves to take the ranch or presses legal charges against Elias. Because the moment these surface, Roy will come after me. Nora, promise me. Nora gripped Clara's shoulders. Promise you'll only use them as a last resort. Let me have this baby first. Let me give my child a chance before I pay for standing up. Clara looked at the documents, then at Nora's desperate face. She thought about justice and mercy, about the impossible choices survival demanded. I promise, but if Elias is in real danger, then use them immediately. I won't let an innocent man suffer. Nora embraced her quickly, fiercely. Thank you. God forgive me, but thank you. After Nora left, Clara stood alone, holding evidence that could destroy Roy Garrison or destroy Nora Sullivan. The weight of that choice pressed against her ribs like stone. She hid the documents in her room, beneath loose floorboards she'd discovered while cleaning. Then she returned to town, to Elias, trying to keep her face neutral. That evening, as they rode back to the ranch, a messenger intercepted them on the trail. Young boy on a lathered horse carrying telegram. For Miss Clara Whitlow, he said, breathless. Clara's hands trembled as she opened it. Clara received your unmailed letters through mutual friend in Illinois, tracked your location through contacts. Arrive Ash Hollow in 1 week. Hold on. Your brother, Jacob Whitlow. She read it 3 times before the words fully penetrated. Jacob, her brother, coming here. She showed the telegram to Elias. I didn't send the letters. I don't know how he got them. Does it matter? Elias studied her face. He's your family. You're glad, aren't you? Yes. Clara folded the telegram carefully, and terrified. What if he tries to take me back? What if he thinks I need rescuing? Then you tell him what you told Roy Garrison. Elias touched her shoulder. Brief, careful. That the owner of your life is you. That night, Clara lay awake in her small room, staring at ceiling beams. She carried 2 secrets now, Nora's documents hidden beneath her floor, and her own growing feelings for Elias Coleman. Both secrets could destroy everything she'd built here. The documents proved Roy's guilt, but endangered a pregnant woman. Her feelings for Elias complicated their arrangement, threatened the careful balance they'd achieved. And now Jacob was coming. Brother she hadn't seen in 2 years. Brother who'd promised to always protect her. Brother who might decide she needed protecting from her own choices. Clara thought about the girl who'd arrived in Ash Hollow 3 months ago, beaten, desperate, broken. Thought about the woman she was becoming, strong, capable, choosing her own path. She'd survived Silas Thornton, survived Roy Garrison's threats, survived the slow, painful process of learning to trust again. She could survive Jacob's arrival, too. And whatever came after. Outside, spring wind moved through awakening trees. Inside, secrets lay hidden beneath floorboards, waiting for the moment when truth would cost more than silence. But for now, Clara slept, and dreamed of choices yet to be made. The summons arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a boy too young to understand the weight of the paper in his hand. Elias read it twice before passing it to Clara. His jaw was set, eyes distant. Civil action. Roy Garrison was suing for unpaid debt and damages for moral complicity in the mine collapse. The trial was Friday, 3 days. Elias moved to the window. Roy's witness, Henry Claiborne, claimed he'd seen Elias accepting payments from Hale to ignore safety violations. If Roy won, he'd seize the ranch and pursue damages that would destroy whatever remained. Clara asked if the debt was real. Elias nodded. He'd borrowed from Hale 2 months after Anna died. Desperate, using the ranch as guarantee. When Roy married Margaret, the debt transferred. Legally binding. That afternoon, a second rider arrived, Jacob Whitlow dismounted with cavalry precision, saddlebags heavy. Inside, Jacob spread documents across the table, hotel registries, receipts, witness statements. Henry Claiborne swore he'd seen Elias take payoffs in March 1881, but Jacob had proof Claiborne was 200 miles north in Fort Benton that entire week. Hotel signatures, supply receipts, 3 merchants' affidavits. Elias studied the papers. "How did you get these?" Jacob's smile was thin. "I learned to track lies the same way I learned to track Apaches." Claiborne's testimony was too specific for something 3 years old, so I checked where he actually was. Clara exhaled relief, but Jacob wasn't finished. He produced a letter. Roy hired a private investigator in Chicago 6 weeks ago to find information about a woman who'd fled employment. The investigator located Silas Thornton, sent him Clara's location, offered travel money. The room tilted. Clara gripped the table. Elias was on his feet. When? 3 weeks ago. Jacob's voice was steady, but his jaw tight. Thornton confirmed he'd come. He's likely in Helena or already heading here. Roy was creating a 2-front assault, legal pressure through court, physical threat through Silas if that failed. "We could leave," Clara said. "Canada's 3 days north." Elias shook head. "Running just delays it, and men like Thornton don't stop." "Then we fight," Jacob said, "in court Friday, and prepare for Thornton after." That night they prepared the ranch, checked ammunition, loaded rifles, positioned them strategically. Jacob walked perimeter, noting sight lines. His military training showed in every calculation. Friday morning the courthouse filled before Judge Baines arrived. Roy sat with his Helena lawyer, dressed in morning black. Elias sat across the aisle, Jacob beside him, Clara behind. Roy's lawyer presented. $1,200 borrowed, ranch as collateral, payments defaulted. But more. Elias had been security supervisor for Hale Mining. Witness testimony would show he'd accepted payments to ignore dangerous conditions. Henry Claiborne took the stand, thin, nervous hands constantly moving. He swore he'd witnessed Elias accepting cash from Hale on March 14, 1881. Behind the mining office, 4 p.m. overcast weather, very specific details. Jacob Whitlow stood. "Your Honor, permission to present contradictory evidence." Baines gestured him forward. The judge read the document slowly, expression unchanged, but something shifted. "Mr. Claiborne," Baines said, "you've testified you witnessed Mr. Coleman on March 14, 1881, correct?" Claiborne confirmed. "Then explain how you were simultaneously 200 miles north in Fort Benton." The judge held up papers. "Hotel registry, with your signature, supply purchases, 3 merchants confirming your presence March 12th through 19th. The courthouse erupted. Baines's gavel cracked. Claiborne stammered about confusion, misremembering dates. The words died in hostile silence. Roy's lawyer tried to recover. Even without witness testimony, the debt remained valid. Baines looked at Elias. "Mr. Coleman, how did you come to borrow this money?" Elias stood, voice rough. After my wife died, I was drowning. Funeral costs, back taxes, whiskey. Hale offered the loan. I signed without understanding the terms. When did he offer this? 2 months after Anna's death, after the collapse that killed her. The judge's eyes were sharp. Were there safety concerns you were aware of? Elias's jaw tightened. Everyone was aware. The mountain was unstable. Hale used too much powder. Miners complained. I heard them. I saw the cracks. I knew. Why didn't you report it? Because Hale paid better than ranching. Because I told myself it wasn't my responsibility. Because I was a coward. Elias's voice broke. 24 people died because men like me stayed silent. My wife died because she had the kindness I lacked. Silence filled the courthouse. Baines studied Elias. Moral culpability and legal culpability aren't the same, Mr. Coleman. You carry guilt for inaction. But this court deals in evidence. He turned to Roy's lawyer. Your witness committed perjury. Your allegations are unfounded. What remains is simple debt collection. The debt is valid, the lawyer insisted. Perhaps, Baines said, but the timing troubles me. Mr. Hale offered this loan 2 months after a tragedy his negligence caused, to a man who just lost his wife, a man in clear distress. Some might call that predatory lending. Roy stood abruptly. Your Honor, Jonathan Hale was trying to help. Sit down, Mr. Garrison. Baines's voice was ice. Your witness perjured himself in my courtroom. I'm ruling this debt was obtained under duress. The collateral clause is void. You'll repay the principal, Mr. Coleman, at standard rates. 5 years to do so. The gavel came down. Case concluded. Outside, spring sun felt too bright. A rider approached from the telegraph office, handing Clara an envelope. Attention, Miss Whitlow. Man called Silas Thornton arrived Helena 3 days ago, making inquiries, offering reward for information. Station Master, Helena. Clara's hand shook. Jacob steadied her. Elias read over her shoulder. How long from Helena? 2 days hard riding, Jacob said. Maybe 3. So he could be here tonight or tomorrow. They understood what Roy had done. Defeated in court, he'd prepared a backup plan, a violent backup plan. We go home, Jacob said. We prepare. When Thornton comes, and he will, we'll be ready. They rode back in silence. Behind them, Roy Garrison watched from the Red Peak Tavern, smiling, thin and satisfied. He'd lost the legal battle, but the war wasn't over. The week after the hearing, Roy Garrison stopped pretending. He remained in Ash Hollow, visible and deteriorating. His clothes grew rumpled, beard unkempt. The careful civility he'd worn like armor had cracked, revealing raw obsession beneath. He drank openly on the Red Peak porch, watching the street with eyes that tracked movement like a wounded animal calculating final strikes. Elias and Clara kept to the ranch. Jacob stayed close, taking temporary work at the neighboring Brennan spread, but visiting daily. Always armed, always scanning horizons before dismounting. On the 8th day, Clara rode to town for supplies despite Elias's protests. She wouldn't hide. She'd spent too much of her life hiding. Fletcher's general store was quiet. She was loading supplies when Roy appeared with 3 rough men flanking him. His appearance shocked her, eyes bloodshot, hands trembling slightly, the smell of whiskey heavy even at mid-morning. You look well, he said. Must be nice, sleeping soundly, while Margaret lies cold, unavenged. Clara kept her voice steady. I understand grief can poison everything it touches, but attacking innocent people won't bring your wife back. Roy's laugh was ugly. Innocent? He stepped closer. You really believe Coleman's hands are clean? One of Roy's men moved toward her wagon. Clara positioned herself between him and her supplies, hand moving to the knife she now carried. The man stopped, grinning. Roy gestured him back. He looked at Clara with something approaching pity. You've chosen the wrong side. When the truth comes out, you'll realize you've been protecting a killer." That evening, Clara told Elias about the encounter. He listened without interrupting, jaw tight. Roy was unstable now, dangerous. This wasn't about justice. It was about a man whose entire purpose had collapsed into ash. 2 days later, Jacob brought news. He'd been at the Red Peak gathering information. Roy was talking about Margaret's diary, about evidence she'd kept, about proof that would finally expose the truth. "Does such a diary exist?" Elias asked. Jacob didn't know, but Roy believed in it, or wanted others to believe he did. Clara felt understanding settle cold. Roy was going to manufacture evidence. And in Montana Territory, where official law was thin and mob justice still breathed, manufactured evidence could kill as surely as bullets. Jacob suggested forcing Roy's hand publicly, make him produce evidence or be branded a liar. A town meeting, open forum. Reverend Josiah Grant agreed to host it. His face was troubled but determined, Sunday after services. Word spread fast. By Saturday, the entire territory knew. Sunday arrived clear and cold. The church filled beyond capacity, bodies pressed along walls, crowding the doorway. Anticipation thickened the air. Grant called for order. This gathering was about community, about truth, about deciding collectively what justice meant when law provided no answers. Roy sat front pew, dressed in black, Margaret's cameo brooch pinned to his lapel. He held a leather journal like scripture. Grant asked Roy to speak. Roy stood, turning to face the crowd. He talked about Margaret's goodness, her conviction that Hale's death was murder. This diary, he said, holding it up, contained her private thoughts, her suspicions, her evidence. And it named Elias Coleman. Murmurs rippled through the congregation. Grant asked to examine the diary. Roy hesitated, then handed it forward. The Reverend read silently, pages turning. His expression remained neutral, but something shifted in his eyes. "When had Margaret written these entries?" Grant asked. Roy said she'd kept it for years, up until her final illness. "Then why was the ink identical throughout?" Grant's voice carried weight. Why did handwriting show no variation between entries supposedly written years apart? Silence crashed over the church. Roy's composure fractured. Margaret had rewritten it for clarity, he claimed. "Fabricated," someone shouted from back. Others joined, voices rising, accusations flying. Roy had forged his dead wife's words. Roy insisted it was real. Margaret had known the truth. Grant's voice cut through chaos. Grief was understandable, but falsifying evidence, invoking a dead woman's name to support lies, that was beyond forgiveness. Roy pointed at Elias, hand shaking. "Coleman is guilty. Everyone knows it. Just because you can't prove it legally doesn't mean it isn't true." Jacob stood from the back. If Margaret knew Coleman was guilty, why hadn't she gone to the marshal? Why keep it secret in a diary instead of seeking justice? Roy had no answer. The logic sustaining his obsession crumbled under basic scrutiny. Elias rose. His voice was steady, carrying to every corner. He hadn't killed Jonathan Hale. He'd lost his wife to Hale's negligence and carried that guilt every day. But guilt for failing to prevent tragedy wasn't guilt for causing murder. If Roy wanted a target for his grief, Elias continued, here he stood. But forging a dead woman's words dishonored Margaret's memory more than any accusation against him ever could. The church held its breath. Grant spoke. This matter was concluded. Roy's accusations were unsupported. His attempt to falsify testimony was shameful. The community would not tolerate it. Roy stood deflated. For a moment he looked lost, a man whose entire purpose had been stripped away. Then his expression hardened. "You think this is over?" He looked at Elias, at Clara, at the assembled crowd. "You think protecting Coleman will save him? There are other ways. other forms of justice. His eyes found Clara. Margaret taught me that. Sometimes you need to use imperfect tools to achieve just ends. The weight of the threat settled over everyone, though nobody fully understood. Roy pushed through the crowd. Nobody stopped him. After, people approached Elias and Clara with quiet support. The community was choosing sides, and they'd chosen belief. That evening, someone brought Clara urgent news. A stranger had been seen in town asking questions about her, tall, heavy build, scar on his neck, a detail only Clara would recognize. He was staying at the Red Peak, had been seen talking with Roy. Silas had arrived, and Roy had brought him. At the ranch they prepared, locked doors, loaded weapons, positioned themselves. Jacob suggested a preemptive strike, but Elias refused. "Let him come," Elias said, staring into darkness beyond lamplight. "This time I won't fail." Outside, wolves sang their evening prayer. Inside, 3 people waited for violence they knew was inevitable. The war Roy had started was about to reach its conclusion, and someone wouldn't survive it. The invitation arrived on Wednesday. Formal card, expensive paper. Roy Garrison requested the honor of their presence at a dinner gathering Saturday evening. A gesture of reconciliation, the card claimed. An olive branch extended in the spirit of community healing. Clara distrusted it immediately. Elias shared her suspicion. But Jacob argued they should attend. Refusing would make them appear guilty, afraid, and public gathering meant witnesses, safety in numbers. They agreed, though unease settled like stone in Clara's stomach. Saturday evening arrived warm and clear. The gathering was at the Red Peak's private dining room. Roy had closed it to regular business. 24 guests, town leaders, prominent ranchers, even Reverend Grant, all watching, waiting to see if peace could be brokered. Roy greeted them at the door, sober and composed. He wore black mourning clothes with precision. His welcome felt rehearsed, fragile as winter ice over running water. The meal was elaborate: venison with herbs, buttered potatoes, warm bread. Roy had spared no expense. He poured wine from Helena bottles, making show of generosity. Clara barely touched her food. She watched Roy with animal wariness, instinct screaming something was wrong. The wine sat untouched before Elias, dark liquid catching lamplight. Roy raised his glass for a toast. "To justice," he said, "to truth, to memories of those we'd lost and the courage to honor them properly." The room murmured agreement, glasses lifted. As Elias reached for his wine, Maria Ortega, serving quietly from the kitchen, moved with sudden urgency. She knocked the glass from Elias's hand. Red wine splashed across white tablecloth like fresh blood. The room went silent. Maria's voice was steady despite trembling hands. She recognized the smell, laudanum, opium mixed with alcohol. She'd seen it used before, knew its bitter almond scent, masked by wine's richness. Roy's mask shattered. Fury and desperation warred across his features. He stood abruptly, chair scraping harsh against wooden floor. "Margaret had told him before she died," he said, voice shaking. "Told him Coleman was guilty. Told him to make it right, whatever the cost. He'd promised her. Promised on her deathbed he'd see justice done." Marshal Thompson moved forward from where he'd been standing against the wall. His hand rested on his pistol. "They'd all protected Coleman," Roy continued, words spilling faster, "hidden his crime. Let a murderer walk free, while good people, his Margaret, Hale, all those miners, lay unavenged." "If the law wouldn't act," Roy said, "then he would. Someone had to honor the dead." He reached inside his coat. Thompson's pistol cleared leather, aimed steady at Roy's chest. "Don't move." But Roy's hand emerged holding a photograph. Margaret on their wedding day, smiling, alive, beautiful. Roy stared at it with such profound loss that Clara felt unexpected pity pierce her anger. "He wasn't a murderer," Roy said quietly. just a man who'd lost everything, who'd built his existence around the promise to his dying wife. Without that promise, he was nothing. Nora Sullivan stepped forward from the crowd. Her voice was clear, carrying weight of long-held confession. She'd killed Jonathan Hale, not Elias Coleman. She'd poisoned the man who'd caused her brother's death through criminal negligence. She'd extracted digitalis from foxglove, administered it over 3 weeks, until Hale's heart stopped. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Roy stared at her, comprehension dawning slowly. But there was more, Nora continued. Her brother Thomas had been assistant supervisor at the mine. He'd kept parallel records, the real ones, documents showing falsified inspections, ignored warnings, excessive powder use, all documented. After Thomas died, Nora had kept those papers. After Hale died of natural causes, Roy had falsified the official mine records, made it look like inspections were done, no negligence occurred, so he could inherit clean. No lawsuits, no responsibility. Roy had discovered Nora had the real documents, first offered money, then threats. Threatened to accuse her of stealing mining equipment, put her in prison where her baby would be born in a cell. Nora pulled an envelope from her dress. These are Thomas's original records, proof that Roy Garrison committed fraud to cover up the negligence that killed 24 people. Judge Baines, present for the dinner, took the documents. He examined them carefully, comparing dates and signatures with known official records. "Mr. Garrison," Baines said, his voice carrying judicial authority, "you not only attempted murder tonight, but you've committed documentary fraud to conceal criminal negligence. You've obstructed justice for 3 years." Roy sank into his chair, photograph still clutched. Everything he'd done, the accusations, the forged diary, tonight's poisoning, all based on Margaret's dying words he'd twisted into justification for his own crimes. Marshal Thompson arrested Roy for attempted murder. There would be a proper trial. Roy didn't resist. He looked hollowed out, empty. As Thompson led Roy away, the man turned back once. He told Elias he was sorry. Margaret would have been ashamed of what he'd become. They returned to the ranch as darkness settled over the valley, relief mixed with exhaustion. Roy was in custody. The nightmare was over. They were wrong. The attack came an hour after sunset. A knock at the door, polite, almost apologetic. A voice claiming to be a traveler lost, needing directions. Clara recognized the voice, froze mid-step, blood draining from her face. Silas? Elias and Jacob were already positioned. They'd expected this. Roy had paid Silas before his arrest, the money already transferred, the violence already purchased. Silas didn't know Roy was in custody, didn't care. He'd come to reclaim what he considered his property, or destroy it. When Silence answered his knock, Silas's politeness evaporated. Wood splintered as he kicked the door. The frame held but cracked. Second kick, and the door burst inward. Silas filled the doorway, tall, broad, scar visible on his neck even in dim lamplight. His eyes found Clara with proprietary hatred. He'd crossed a continent for this moment. Elias stepped forward, positioning himself between Silas and Clara. His voice was steady. "You're not welcome here. Leave now, or face consequences." Silas laughed, ugly sound that made Clara's skin crawl with remembered terror. "Old man thinks he can stop me." He cracked his knuckles. "I paid good money to find you, Clara. You cost me reputation, humiliation. Time to settle accounts." Jacob moved from the side, rifle raised. "You're trespassing, and assaulting a woman is a hanging offense in Montana." Silas's hand moved faster than expected. Gun cleared holster. Fired. Jacob dove aside. Shot going wide. Return fire splintered the doorframe beside Silas's head. Then Silas charged. He hit Elias like a battering ram. Both men crashed into furniture, table overturning, lamp shattering. Fire spread from spilled oil. Jacob couldn't shoot. Clara was in the line of fire. Elias and Silas rolling, grappling. Silas was younger, stronger, brutal. He fought without technique but with overwhelming force, fists like hammers, each blow meant to break bones. Elias fought with desperation of a man who'd already lost everything once. He used technique over strength, trying to control position, but Silas's rage was overwhelming. Clara grabbed the kitchen knife, hands shaking. She'd sworn she'd never be helpless again. But facing Silas, actually facing him, terror threatened to paralyze her. Silas gained dominant position, straddling Elias, hands closing around his throat. "Should have stayed in your mountains, old man." His voice was calm, conversational, as he strangled the life from Elias. Jacob circled, trying for a clear shot. Flames from the spilled oil climbed the wall, smoke filling the room. Elias's vision darkened. Silas's face above him blurred, distant. He thought of Anna, how he'd failed her, how she'd died while he was gone, how he'd spent 3 years drowning in guilt and cowardice. Then he saw Clara, saw her fear, saw her raising that knife with trembling hands. "Falhei com Ana," Elias thought, dredging up words from somewhere deep. "Deixei ela morrer porque não tive coragem. Não vou falhar de novo." Something shifted inside him, not strength, purpose. He stopped fighting Silas's hands. Instead, he used the angle, twisted his hips, broke Silas's base. The younger man's balance failed. Elias rolled, reversing position. But Silas was already moving, reaching for his dropped gun. His fingers closed on metal. Jacob's rifle cracked. Once. The sound was deafening in enclosed space. Silas jerked, eyes going wide. The gun fell from his hand. He looked down at the spreading red on his chest with something like confusion. He fell sideways, body hitting the floor with finality. Marshal Thompson burst through the broken door, 2 deputies behind him. They'd been riding out to warn about Silas, had heard the gunshot. Thompson surveyed the scene, Silas's body, the spreading fire, 3 people who'd just survived attempted murder. "Self-defense," he said after a moment, "clear as day." They extinguished the fire, removed Silas's body. Thompson noted that Silas had an active warrant in Chicago for aggravated assault and fraud. They'd done the law a favor. After the marshal left, Clara, Elias, and Jacob sat on the porch in pre-dawn darkness, exhausted, traumatized, alive. The ranch was damaged but standing. The threats, all of them, were eliminated. Roy in custody, Silas dead. Nora's documents proving Roy's fraud. Judge Baines had already ruled the debt obtained under duress would be canceled entirely, given Roy's criminal conduct. The ranch was safe. They were safe. Elias looked at his hands. They were shaking. He'd killed before. In war, in self-defense. But this felt different. Final. Clara took his hand. "You saved my life. Saved all our lives." Elias shook his head. "We saved each other." Jacob stood, stretching. "I should check the perimeter. Make sure no more surprises." After he left, Clara and Elias sat together, watching the first light touch distant mountains. Everything they'd built had almost been destroyed tonight, but it had survived. They had survived. And sometimes survival was its own kind of victory. 3 months passed between blood and forgiveness. Roy Garrison was sentenced to 12 years for attempted murder and documentary fraud. In prison, he finally accepted that Margaret had never asked for vengeance, only that he moved forward. He'd twisted her dying words into justification for his own darkness. Nora Sullivan faced Judge Baines for killing Jonathan Hale. The judge considered circumstances, the negligence that killed 24 men, the law's failure to hold Hale accountable, the evidence she'd preserved that saved an innocent man. Sentence: 5 years community service providing free medical care to minors and their families. Her baby was born healthy in late summer. A girl. Nora named her Anna in honor. The community supported her. Silas Thornton was buried in the territorial cemetery, his death ruled justified homicide. Clara was finally free of that shadow. October arrived with gold light and cooling winds. The ranch had transformed through summer's labor, fences straight, garden harvested, house gleaming with care. The wedding took place on the first Saturday of October. Reverend Grant performed the ceremony in the small church. The building was packed with genuine well-wishers. Before the ceremony began, Clara made a request. She brought Anna's completed portrait to the altar, positioning it where everyone could see. She spoke to the assembled community, voice steady. This woman loved Elias Coleman when he'd forgotten how to love himself. Clara wouldn't erase her, wouldn't pretend she'd never existed. She would honor Anna by loving the man Anna had loved, by tending the land Anna had tended, by building on the foundation Anna had laid. The portrait would hang in their home. Anna Coleman would be remembered, not as obstacle to new love, but as the woman who'd made that love possible. Several people wept openly. Elias stood with tears on his face. Reverend Grant blessed the union. What was stone had become home, he said. What was mourning had become life. What was vengeance had become justice. The vows were simple, traditional. When Elias placed the ring on Clara's finger, Anna's ring, offered freely, accepted gratefully, the gesture carried weight of past honored and future embraced. After the ceremony, the community gathered at the ranch for celebration. Food, music, children's laughter, sounds the house had forgotten. Jacob pulled Clara aside as evening descended. He'd received orders. The army wanted him back east. He'd be leaving in 2 weeks. Clara's throat tightened. She'd just found her brother again. But Jacob smiled, squeezing her hand. He'd be back. This was her home now, which made it his home too. Family was where you chose to belong. As darkness fell and guests departed, Clara and Elias stood together watching stars emerge. The valley spread before them, peaceful and whole. "Are you happy?" Elias asked, voice quiet, almost hesitant. Clara thought about Chicago and Silas Thornton, and the desperate woman who'd stumbled off a stagecoach into Montana winter, about fear and shame, and the long process of healing. "I'm more than happy," she said. "I'm home. Not because of place, but because of person, because of the man who stood beside her, scarred and imperfect, and brave enough to try again." Elias pulled her close. They stood breathing together, living together in the present instead of haunted past. Inside the house, Anna's portrait watched with painted eyes that held no judgment, only peace. The dead had been honored. The living had been freed to live. Tomorrow would bring work, land to tend, wood to chop for coming winter. But tonight was for gratitude, for recognizing that survival wasn't ending. It was beginning. In the Bitterroot Valley, between mountains and memories, 2 broken people had learned that starting over didn't mean forgetting. It meant having courage to build from what remained. The stars wheeled overhead, ancient and indifferent. But beneath them, in a ranch house that had been dead and was now alive, 2 hearts beat in rhythm. And in the morning they would wake together, work together, live together. That was justice, that was mercy, that was enough.